Thanks for joining, everybody. We're going to give folks a couple more minutes to join and then we'll get started. But as you're joining, while you're settling in, feel free to add any questions you really hope will get answered today into the Q&A function of Zoom.
Good afternoon, everyone. It looks like a few more people are joining. As Bailey just shared, as you're getting settled, hopefully going to get water, running to the restroom before everything gets started, we ask that you go ahead and add any questions, any burning questions that you have to the chat, and we'll save those for our Q&A portion of today's conversation. As we're going ahead and getting started, I just wanted to orient you to what you'll be experiencing today. We're going to spend about 15 minutes digging into the resources, research, and ideas regarding accelerated learning. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time together answering questions from our panelists today. And we're going to go ahead and just do some brief intros of everyone that you'll be talking with today. Starting first with myself, Jamila Newman. I'm a partner at TNTP, where I've been for 7 years. I do work in our Southeast region, primarily in Mississippi and the state of Tennessee, and also manage our internal teaching and learning team that's been tasked with supporting the organization to rethink our perspective on teaching and learning in light of our most recent national report, The Opportunity Myth. And I'll kick it over to Bailey.
Hi, y'all. I'm Bailey Cato Czupryk. I'm a vice president at TNTP and lead a lot of our internal best practice work, our team that shares external best practices and also that conducts research. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Hey, everybody. Mike Petrilli. I'm the president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, think tank nationally, and we also do on-the-ground work in the great state of Ohio. And I'm looking forward to telling you about our crowdsourced recovery plan, which is called the Acceleration Imperative. Great. And how about Dan? You want to pipe in?
Happy to. Hi, everybody. Dan Weisberg. I'm the CEO of TNTP. Really happy to be here and happy you could all be here. Andy, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Andy Jacob. I'm on the communications team at TNTP, and I'm really just here sort of facilitating the Q&A, but we'll chime in where it makes sense. And I think that's everyone. Oh, and I saw that Dr. Santelises just joined us.
My apologies all. It's great to be here. Sonja Santelises, CEO, Baltimore City Public Schools.
Great. So we're so excited to have an opportunity to talk to you today, and hopefully you'll get to pepper many of the panelists that you've seen with any questions that you have regarding acceleration or the actions that systems and educators can take to support students with unfinished instruction. Today's conversation, as I said, for folks who've just joined, we're going to spend the first 15 minutes just getting oriented to the resources, research, and literature regarding accelerated learning, and then we'll reserve the remainder of our time, pretty much the bulk of our time, for Q&A. So hopefully you'll leave here with many of the questions that you've added to the chat answered for yourself. Just for us to get started, I wanted to just begin by reminding us all of what exactly are we talking about when we talk about remediation versus acceleration. As you all know from research, our current research is suggesting that students will return from their COVID hybrid instruction or virtual instruction, having experienced more unfinished instruction than ever before. And typically, our education system has reacted in the way that we've trained educators too. We've spent the majority of our time working with students on skills that really mirror the principles of remediation, which often involves, for many students, spending an inordinate amount of time or significant time on below grade level content before moving into new learning. And what we know as a result is that these main two strategies of remediation are not serving our students well. This means that teachers often go back and reteach content that was missed before getting students into grade level content. So for students who have missed the bulk of the year or experienced incredible unfinished instruction because of COVID, we're imagining that the instinct will be for teachers and educators to kind of glom onto the beginning of the year or onto the beginning of units content from prior grades. And what we're really asking educators to do instead is to shift to the mindset of acceleration over remediation, which really means that we start students at grade level with grade level content and reteach previous content from prior grades when it's really necessary for students to access new grade level content. And this is really what we call just-in-time supports. So it is guided by grade level content. It comes in the context of grade level content, and it is only recovered or retaught if it provides access to grade level content. That is accelerated learning. Let's get into some more of the research, and I'll kick it over to Bailey.
So as we thought at TNTP about the supports we could provide to systems around the country, one of the things we have been advocating for the past year and a half or so is really an acceleration-based approach as opposed to a remediation-based approach. And about a week and a half ago at this point, we released a paper with our colleagues at Zern, an online-based high-quality math curriculum that shared what we think of as compelling new evidence for why it is we should focus on learning acceleration strategy. So there were three big headlines of that report. I'm not going to walk you through the entirety of the report or every chart in it, but we used the online math materials and the data that Zern collects as a part of those online math materials to essentially study a set of classrooms. Some of those classrooms had experienced learning acceleration and some of them had experienced remediation. And what we found is that students in classrooms that experienced learning acceleration struggled less, but also learned more than kids who started at the same level but experienced remediation instead. We also saw that kids of color and kids from low-income backgrounds were much more likely than their white, wealthier peers to experience remediation, even if those kids had already demonstrated success for grade level content in Zern's platform. And finally, we saw a real reason for hope that learning acceleration, when we apply it in elementary mathematics classrooms, seems really effective for students of color and students from low-income families. I'm going to walk you through a couple of the high-level findings before we jump to Mike and the Fordham resource that we are going to share with you all. And we'll name, I'm seeing some questions come in. We will share the PowerPoint, a recording will also share links to all the resources we're sharing, so you guys don't have to try to Google and find them. But want to orient you to the findings from our paper, Accelerate, Don't Remediate. So first finding was that classes receiving learning acceleration had more success this year and made it farther in the grade level curriculum. So orienting you to what you see on the screen, this data represents kids in about 6,000 classrooms that Zern was able to identify in their data set who had missed a chunk of content in the 2019-2020 school year. They were in classrooms when schools closed in 2019-2020. Their math experiences functionally just stopped. And if you look at the chart on the left-hand side of the screen, what you can see is that Zern is a math program that essentially is set up to, when kids get to independent practice, they do a grade level math problem. And if they struggle, the teacher essentially gets at what is called a struggle alert that signals to them that student might need additional supports. And so on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see a chart that the vertical axis is actually struggle. So you are seeing when the line goes up, kids are struggling more with grade level content. The horizontal axis is time. And so what we found in this set of 6,000 classrooms is The kids in these classrooms were performing at about the same level in 2018 and 2019. They struggled a little bit more on grade level content in 2019 and 2020, but still performing at about the same level. And then in 2020, 2021, when we put them into groups of classrooms that experienced acceleration, where kids spent time on grade level content, occasionally dipping into below grade level content when they needed it, those kids mostly regained their pre-pandemic success in mathematics, while kids who were in classrooms that were receiving remediation, classrooms that started basically where the previous year had left off for those students in below grade level content, they struggled 10 times more than students who experienced learning acceleration. For us, this is really important and honestly kind of counterintuitive findings, because the whole reason we remediate kids, y'all, is we don't want them to be confused. We don't want them to struggle. We're not sure that they can do the grade level work. And so what we see here is that, kids who were remediated in these classrooms actually demonstrated more struggle. They were more confused when they got to grade level content. So the whole purpose of remediation doesn't seem to be playing out in CERN's data set, because kids who experience acceleration are actually struggling less while also experiencing more grade level content. We also saw, though, as we alluded to, that kids of color and kids from low income backgrounds were actually much more likely than their white and wealthier peers to experience remediation. So what you can see here on the vertical axis is just the percent of kids who are having an experience of remediation as opposed to an acceleration-based experience. And on the horizontal axis, we've actually cut that by the rate of struggle. So we are looking at kids who struggle less compared to kids who are struggling more with grade level content. And on both of these charts, you can see kids in high poverty schools more than almost twice as likely to be remediated as kids in low poverty schools, even when they'd had similar rates of success on grade level content. You can see a similar thing when we look at schools that are made up of predominantly students of color. Even when kids are demonstrating very little struggle on grade level content, it's still really likely that they're going to be sent back into remedial content. And we think that is, evidence of systemic racism playing out in classrooms and in the choices we make, similar to what we saw in The Opportunity Myth, our 2018 paper. And so as we think about what it is that the field should do with these findings, we really articulated two big recommendations. The first is to invest in infrastructure for learning acceleration, really making sure that every kid in this country has access to high quality instructional materials, and that educators, teachers, school leaders, and system leaders have the supports they need to support teachers in using those high quality instructional materials well to accelerate learning. We also encourage systems to really think about how they are executing equitably, knowing that we have decent evidence from multiple data sources that kids of color and kids from low-income backgrounds are more likely to be remediated. They're less likely to experience grade level content. We want to make sure that systems are thinking about and monitoring which kids are getting access to high quality grade level experiences. And also we're making sure that systems are really engaging families, caregivers, and stakeholders in their acceleration strategy, so that everybody who's surrounding an individual kid or set of kids is really focused on making sure we're taking an acceleration-based approach. I'm seeing some questions come in. I'm gonna actually have Mike, if it feels okay, I'm gonna have you go through the slides and then we'll take questions all at the end.
That sounds great. Thanks, Bailey. And thank you so much to TNTP, both for partnering on this webinar, but also for the great work you've been doing with this study, but also with the previous work. This is incredibly important stuff, and it's hard stuff to get right. And so looking forward to getting into these questions, which really get into instructional practice. So my job is to tell you a little bit about the acceleration imperative. There is that acceleration word again. I know somebody made a comment in the chat already that it's a confusing term to some because sometimes people think that means above grade level or going faster. We mean it as in helping kids certainly catch up, again, not by going backwards or mediation, but by helping them move forward. The acceleration imperative, which is on your screen now, is a resource for school districts, for charter school networks and others, really aimed at the system level. It's meant to be a model recovery plan starting this fall. It's also packed full of ideas for how to spend those federal relief funds that are coming your way. And it's long and comprehensive, and that gives you an indication of the main argument in this plan, which is that it's not enough to just try to add on some new services. You know, let's try to take what we're doing and just patch on some tutoring or extended learning time or mental health supports, though all of those three things are extremely important and certainly are things we should be spending money on. But that we also have to get the core academic program right. And this is a fantastic opportunity with this federal funding to do that. So this is a plan that was crowdsourced. A group of chief academic officers, former CAOs, academics, other experts came together to put this together. It is on a wiki site, as I'll talk about, so it is meant to keep evolving. So we would love for all of you to take a look at it and tell us how we can make it better. And really, when you dig into it, I think what you'll find is that it's a vision for a high-performing elementary school. It's focused on elementary school. It gets into all the nuts and bolts of what it means to run a great elementary school, from curriculum to culture to interventions and beyond. And again, the main argument here being that let's take this opportunity to improve the core academic program. Because, for example, if we see school districts go on and try to build a new tutoring program with their relief funds to help kids next fall, that could be quite effective, especially if you get the details right. But one of the details is, almost everybody agrees, you want to align what's happening in tutoring with what's happening during the regular school day and use the same curriculum. Well, as a lot of you educators know, there are still way too many places in this country where there is no curriculum. There is no core curriculum. Teachers are still scrambling to find instructional materials aligned to standards, rather than having their district or network have gone through a thoughtful process to adopt high quality curriculum. This is a great time to do that. There's money for those adoption cycles. There's also money for professional learning opportunities. And so this would be a time to make that investment. Can we get to the point where we finally get a majority, maybe even the vast majority of American schools to the place where they've got this basic infrastructure, as somebody called it the other day, of a high quality curriculum in the core areas and the professional learning to go along with it. Likewise, if you're going to do mental health supports, which clearly lots of kids are going to need, that only makes sense if you also make sure that your school culture is a positive culture. Otherwise, you don't want kids coming back to school and getting re-traumatized by a toxic school culture and environment. So we really got to get into all of these nuts and bolts. Bailey, you can go on to the next slide, or Andy, whoever's driving. So again, this is meant to keep evolving. We've got this resource, which I'll put a link to in the chat, on a wiki site. It's really designed so that you can go on there, provide comments and even edits like you could in Wikipedia. If you see something that isn't quite right, you can make it better, and we would love for you to do that. It has already gotten some good feedback and comments from several folks, again, both practitioners and some academics, and it's getting better and better every day. We're going to come out with a version 2.0 soon that really compiles all these different changes into one place. So please help us let it get better. Next slide just kind of shows you that you get editing permission, and then you can go ahead and help us make this thing better. And finally, the final slide. It also, when you dig in, you'll notice that there's already tons of comments, especially from some of the original folks that helped us build this. So you can't maybe see this, but this comment from Doug Lamar, for example, it's kind of fun. You go through and you read this plan. At some points, there's some debate, about how exactly do you do some of these things in English language arts, in mathematics, in instructional strategies for kids with disabilities, or whatever the topic may be. And you get to see some of these luminaries in our field weighing in on these topics, which is kind of fun and illuminating as well. So again, please do give it a look. I think you'll find it's particularly helpful for maybe people at the district or network level, but I certainly hope the teachers find it helpful as well. And I look forward to this robust conversation as we start answering these questions that you all have about how to actually do this in the classroom. Great.
And we all are going to kick off the Q&A actually with a question for Dr. Santelises, who is, I think, the person who is most on a day-to-day basis thinking about how to execute this as you lead Baltimore City Public Schools. So Dr. Santelises, would love to just hear your voiceover of what's Baltimore's acceleration strategy. How are you thinking about doing this in real life in Baltimore?
Yeah, and it is the real life piece, isn't it? And I appreciated the questions in the Q&A that really resonated most with me were questions about, do you have guidance for teachers on what lesson planning for acceleration looks like? What are the tools that are necessary? And those really kind of what I call feet to the ground questions. And I want to start out by saying, like, Baltimore City as a district has not kind of done wholesale acceleration before. So I want to like go on record as saying that we're not like, ooh, come visit Baltimore because we've done it for 5 years. That's not where we are. What we're doing is kind of taking the best work in this space. And I now get to say to Dan, not over social media, but seeing his face in person, to both of you all, that both Zern and TNTP, you came out with your piece just in time. And so part of it is because we had kind of, I don't want to say instinctively, but we had started moving in the direction that frankly, the Zern TNTP work just solidified for us and gave us kind of grounding. We also started out with conversations, and I want to give a shout out to David Steiner at Hopkins, who's just down the road. He has spoken to our cabinet in terms of how we're planning for this, and some of our mid-level curriculum people. And what I will say is this, that the way we're approaching it in Baltimore is about how do we build space for more time, right? So how do we build more time in the school year, use time differently, but also, and this is something that teachers cheer about, right? Like, how do we not make coverage of everything the most essential thing to do? And I think Mike's reference to high quality instructional materials, K through 8, we had already built that out, right? So we already had high quality instructional materials, at least in math and ELA in place. I would say we're getting ready to do that for high school ELA. And we also have some science going on, right, in K through 8. That to kind of, for us, sets the foundation. What it means going into this year is that we are having to make real strategic decisions about what we are going to hone in on in the curriculum, right? So if, for example, Wit and Wisdom, we're expected to get through 4 units a year. Part of what we are making the bet on is that if we do 3, because it's high quality, right? It's not busy work for kids. And we actually can guide teachers through what the most essential skills are within those units, what's the most essential learning, and then match that. And this is going to be a lift for us with individual learning plans for every student. Like, it sounds really simple just to say that, but it's actually not, at least not in Baltimore, to generate, right, really detailed kind of skill mapping requires us to hone in, frankly, on the most important assessments, right? Not the 3 or 4, Mike can block his ears on this one, no state test this year, right? Like, we're gonna have to really, I know, Mike, but what we're really gonna have to do is say, where do we get the best information that's most rapid about the essential skills that kids are missing? And that communication to families is going to be key, because I will tell you, we have not explained this kind of teaching and learning deep focus before. And so I will be like, even in Baltimore, you know, even though I said a year ago, right, we're not holding mass numbers of kids back, I already have requests from parents, can I hold my kid back? And in part because we have not explained to them what will be different, what will feel different in terms of the social emotional piece of school. So we actually are spending a lot of time with that. How do we make kids feel good about being back? How do we help kids not feel like, let's just push this all away because I'm so far behind anyway? But it's going to require lots of time for teacher planning, more than we normally give. It's going to require real clear identification of those skill strands and what is the most important. Again, the Zern work has helped us on that because we have examples of it in math, and we're going to do it in literacy, and really building that in with teacher leaders. So I know that's a lot, but I do think the work around the content, starting with the high quality curriculum materials, and we're going out there and we're gonna say, these are the ones we're focusing on. And we know some of you think it's about full completion, but it's actually not, not when kids are this far behind. So again, shout out to Zern and TNTP for giving us some research to be able to stand on with that, and frankly, using time better. Using summers better, using intercession better, giving our high school kids more time options, which they were very clear over the last year and a half, like your current 8 to 3 is not working for me. And so how do we take that and expand it? But it has to be both. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. Dan, I'm going to call on you for this one because we got a couple of questions around just how do you measure struggle in those charts you just showed. What's that mean? So could you voice that over for folks?
Yeah, I think I at least tried to put it into the chat, but we'll do it again because we have there's a footnote in the paper that you can take a look at. But I will say just a high level, our friends at Zern have designed into their platform points at which where students are having trouble with particular concepts, and so they can see that in answers to questions and assessments and so forth. They'll provide kind of a boost and extra help on that. At a certain point, the system triggers an alert, what they call a tower alert, because it appears to the folks at Zern, based on their data, that the student is no longer productively struggling, but has now reached past that point and is really just spinning his or her wheels. And so they have, I mean, the benefit of that is they have pretty objective data from across a very large data set of, in this case, for some of our research questions, 2.2 million children. And so we can then identify the rate at which students in particular schools are getting past that point of productive struggle and are really just struggling at a point where it's not productive, and where kids are kind of moving on smoothly and have command of the material. So, but there's a more detailed description in the paper for anybody who's interested. But that is how we are capturing the concept of struggle in the paper.
I want to open up to the full group a question about literacy. So the Zern data is grounded in elementary mathematics. What's learning acceleration look like in literacy? How's it the same? How is it different? And I imagine actually everybody on the panel has thoughts here. So I'm going to invite everybody to jump in.
I'm ready to jump. So Allison in the Q&A asked about, is there research that shows that remediation doesn't work for literacy? And there has been research all the way back since like 2016 that remediation isn't serving us well, even in the literacy space and before that. So just talking a little bit about how it differs in the literacy space, when we think about a simple view of reading, or Scarborough's wrote kind of the skills that make up literacy, let's separate foundational skills, or the things about accuracy and fluency, from meaning making or reading comprehension. When we're talking about accelerated learning, we are specifically talking about what it looks like in that reading comprehension vein, not in foundational skills. And what I mean by that is if we're talking to a third grade child and we're assessing them on their foundational skills and we see, oh, wow, this student is missing has some significant gaps in their understanding of foundational skills or missing specific graphemes or phonemes, we would not just move that student ahead in foundational skills. We would actually go back to where those gaps are and do that skill building for decoding, accuracy, and fluency at the grade level they are. We can't miss those critical skills and foundational skills, that critical learning and foundational skills. That being said, when it comes to meaning making, remediation has not worked, primarily because we're missing the mark that if a student is struggling in reading comprehension, it is most likely because they are lacking prior knowledge, they're missing some critical academic language or vocabulary acquisition, or some of the soft skills that is required for that reading comprehension to really take root. But when we think about how remediation or reteaching is typically structured, it is very focused on isolated skill building. I want to get you really good at main idea. And I might kill it on main idea and then go back to that text that I was struggling with on that assessment and still not be able to tackle that text because it's about hockey and I grew up in the South and I have no idea about ice rinks. So that is an example of why remediation fails us, because it often doesn't target the root cause of what is holding students back in their comprehension of literacy instruction. Prior knowledge, vocabulary, and soft skills. It just focuses on that isolated skill building. I hope that's helpful.
And a hockey reference, which I will own I was not expecting.
Girl from the South, I have no idea what you're
anybody else want to layer in there?
I mean, wow, it's hard to top that. That was fantastic. I think, just to say that, of course, this was why the Common Core standards way back when had such a big focus on making sure that kids had access to grade level texts. And, this pushback against the so-called, just right books practice, which is not to say that, I mean, my understanding, and a lot of this is going to go right over my head, so I'm not going to say too much, but that there's certainly, when kids are reading on their own, there's an appropriate for them to read below grade level text sometimes if that's where they're at. But it's super important that every kid has an opportunity, hopefully every day, to also read grade level text or higher with the help of a teacher, because there is good evidence that if they don't, they'll just never make progress. They're never going to catch up.
Yeah, I would just hear what Jamila said about the difference with foundational skills, and actually the way we're implementing this for K2, because of what we've seen in some of our formative assessment data for those foundational skills, is that those skills we're actually doubling down on, but not in isolation, right? We're saying fluency is a focus, and for which students does really deep work in fluency, particularly at the second, third grade level. And dare I say, we've even seen some difference with some of our low readers in middle school who actually have explicit regular fluency practice. I think that is different from what we're doing in Wit and Wisdom, which is our main kind of K-8, and that is more what's the content that you're exposed to. So as Jamila said, right, and actually now I'm going to go back and check to see if Wit and Wisdom has an ice hockey unit. I don't know if they do, but it's that deliberate content build that is on one side. But we have found with our lowest readers in the early grades that actually their self-efficacy builds when they have the foundational skills. When we give them more time to get those foundational skills, they actually attend better when we get to the actual Wit and Wisdom units, because they're not frustrated by the fact that they can't leap over the code. And so what it means is we have to do multiple things. And so in practice, it means we're arranging our blocks for the fall. To really, again, match those students who at home, and with masks, my God, I think every pre-K through one teacher, maybe two teacher who's been trying to do, sorry about that, letter sound correspondence. This is why you go to the office, even on asynchronous days. When you are trying to do through masks and Zoom, letter sounds, phoneme awareness, like it's been really hard. And so part of what we're trying to do is regain some of that time and space so that those young people don't miss out on what we consider critical. But we do separate them in that sense.
I want to push us to Lindsay's question. So Lindsay says, we're hearing a lot about less is more, less modules, less units, less missions. Do you all think high quality curricular groups are going to make formal recommendations about teaching less? And Dr. Santelises, I would actually love to hear from you a little bit about how you've worked with your curricular providers and what you're asking them for in terms of what you need to do this work.
No, you hit on it. And that question, I did see it. I can't remember who asked it first. It is essential. If every single school district has to go through their set of curriculum materials to identify what those kind of key strands are, we could spend just the summer doing that. So we are actually asking our curriculum partners to say, okay, wit and wisdom, if we're going to do these deeply, right, you've got to give up some of your orthodoxy, right, on it must be all 4 units, and really help us hone in on what are the essential pieces. And frankly, the designers of the materials should know where those are. Second, I will say there are outside organizations like Student Achievement Partners, like TNTP, I think, Dan, that have done some of this work already. And so we are not recreating that. And I want to be straightforward. There might be some Baltimore, some nuancing here and there. We are relying on the folks who have gone through the content first. Same thing with curriculum associates and our math mapping. We're relying on their mapping. And frankly, I think district leaders, school leaders, and these folks know I love them dearly. That's your job to do. That's what we're paying you for. We bought your materials, so you know your materials best. And so I should not have to pay my folks to go through and find that.
I've had a couple of questions about, I'm going to say it's the concept of extra time, and then also this idea of how to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 tutoring, like how do you think about all of those things together? And so would love to hear from the panel as you think about acceleration strategies and you think about, the infusion of dollars that we're seeing in a lot of places for tutoring and the RTI or MTSS requirements and systems that districts have. How do you put that all together to get to simple, easy question? I know that definitely won't take the remaining time, but how do you think about putting that all together to get to an experience where kids are ultimately able to master grade level content and grow at the rate we know they can?
Bailey, I want to invite you to not just ask the questions and facilitate, but offer some responses, because I know you have strong thoughts on the MTSS question and tutoring. So,
Dan, I'm going to make Jamila go first, always. So.
Yeah, I think it is really, and I'm so glad to hear that Dr. Santelises talked about like her first step of acceleration is not getting into like the classroom practice, but really thinking about the conditions that enable acceleration to happen, be it high quality instruction, looking at how time is currently spent and making sure that it's being maximized. Because I really do think it's about coherence. And what I often see people doing is jumping to tier 2 and tier 3 without saying like, wait, is our tier 1 instruction even strong enough to support it? Because you can't really have the right data to understand what needs to happen in tier 2 and tier 3 if tier 1 instruction is not doing the things that it needs to do and giving you an accurate sense of really what students can demonstrate in terms of their understanding of academic standards or skills. And so sometimes we get into thinking about intervention, remediations, retention, pull out, push in, all of those things before, and have really strong structures for that. And then we walk into core instruction and it's a 90-minute free-for-all. And so I really think that in order for tier 2 and tier 3 to be successful, we've got to first really understand what's happening in tier 1 to make sure that the data that we're then baton tossing or baton carrying to tier 2 and tier 3 is accurate, that we can really pinpoint with more certainty what the needs are for students. Because sometimes we're having students pull out or push in or work on things that are actually not really meaningful or attached to the root challenges that they're having academically.
Anything other panelists would add on there? As Amy, I appreciate your point in the chat. You can't intervene your way out of a tier 1 problem.
I will just say it's the alignment that keeps me up at night. I mean, just to kind of summarize what was just said, that's what keeps me up at night, is do we have enough alignment between all of these kind of interventions? And one of the things, and not interventions, but inputs, I think is the correct term. And one of the things that we know, particularly about low performing schools, chronically low performing schools, is they actually have some of the most inputs of any schools. They actually have too many inputs. And so the harder question for us that we're forcing ourselves to do is to kind of strip things away and say, what are the connections between all of them? And part of what made our virtual tutoring so successful was that we partnered with Amplify. Well, Amplify is our formative assessment partner, right, around early literacy. And we found that when young people attended, and they had to attend 3 days, at least 3 days a week, but some of what I know contributed to that is the continuum, right? So tutors were being trained on the same data that our teachers used and using similar support materials within the embedded technology. And so the lack of breach made a difference for young people, because what they were experiencing in that tutoring time was built on what they were experiencing in classroom time. And our fragmentation is, you know, I mean, I hate to be dramatic about it, but our fragmentation is killing kids and it's killing teachers. Like, we're asking people to do too much. And I will just tell you that stripping away is really hard when you have people that are wed to each of those 50 things. To say, sorry, this time we're not going to do your thing, is hard, but it needs to be done.
Yeah, and I would just say +1 on that. And Mike, I saw you giving a thumbs up as well. I think, you know, that there's such opportunity. We have once in a generation resources coming in from the federal government. A lot of excitement, I think rightly so, around tutoring as a positive support. But what Dr. Santelises just said is so critical. And I frankly worry about it because I don't hear that being said, that alignment point being talked about often enough when we're talking about tutoring. And otherwise it can just be a random act that, as Dr. Santelises says, just kind of adds to the disjointed noise that our educators and kids often are subjected to. So really important, whatever the intervention is, that there is direct tie to the curriculum, to the interim assessment regime, to and to what you're doing in tier 1. I also saw a comment in the chat, really important for many students with special needs. Their entire academic experience is about intervention that is disconnected from what's happening in tier 1 instruction, or what should be happening in tier 1 instruction. And so that's another place where we can use this time where there's tremendous focus, there's will, there's, again, resources that we haven't had before around how do we solve a problem that, if we're honest, we've done a terrible job on over the decades, and that is catching kids up and getting kids on track to meet their goals when they're coming in with gaps, whatever those gaps are. This is not a new, all of us know on this call, it's not a new problem. The magnitude may be new, but the nature of the problem is not new. So what an opportunity now, not just for the next few months, but over the course of the next few years, to really re-examine all of our practices with multilingual learners, with students with students who have major gaps, who are grade levels behind. We can really do these things, really create this alignment, strip down in smart ways, the way Dr. Santelises is talking about, and create the systems that are going to help us do much, much better for students, for a whole range of students, not just coming out of the pandemic, but going forward.
Dr. Santelises, we have a request for you to talk a little bit more about those individual student learning maps or plans and what those are going to look like in Baltimore City.
Well, great. I will stop typing because I was typing the response near the end. See, I know you thought I wasn't doing my job, but this is good. So one of the things I started typing was, we're in the middle of this now, right? So I don't want to act as if, oh, this is the plan, this is how it works, da da da. Part of the goal was really to, one, have a way of communicating with families. And we actually heard from some key parent organizations like Propel, right, in Nashville, that were doing this. And we actually got the idea from them because they were pushing for it. But one of the things we said in the development of the plan is that it has to be more information than just the standardized or formative assessed home reports that generally go home. So we will have some of that formative assessment data, but one of the things we're doing now is really breaking that down on what's the most essential information for each grade level band of development for students, right? So for example, I keep referring to fluency, like our parents we didn't tell them where the fluency information was when they got their report. So what we're doing is we're pulling it out. The other piece we heard from families is they really want space to tell educators what is important for them to know about how their children experienced this past year. So it's not just an assessment of where their skills are, but we felt really strongly like we needed to input. And as a mom of students in the district, I will tell you, like, I have twin middle schoolers who experienced the year very differently. There is one that if you pulled her in January and did an assessment, you'd think she was 2.5 years below grade level because frankly, she was depressed being home. You put her back in school and within a week, it's like she's a totally different kid. How do parents have a space to tell us, to teach us about what their children went through and our families? And so part of that won't go out before the end of the year because we just don't have time for that. So, but the goal is that somewhere in those first 6 weeks, there'll be more of like a composite. We'll prioritize the students that were kind of mid to lower performance first, and then eventually move to all students, but it will be a profile that'll then get updated with some of the formative assessment data. And we're really committed to really isolating what that most important data is. And I can't emphasize enough that it's got to be manageable, not just for teachers, but for families. And that's one of our big learnings from this year. And I will just end with a story where a parent in our district, like one of my senior leaders, asked for, I can't even remember, it was some part of the Amplify early reading piece, and she asked for a piece of data. She said, oh, it's not here. And her child's teacher said to her, oh, we don't normally give that data to parents. And she said, excuse me, what do you mean you don't give that data to parents? So part of why it's really important for us to do that is so that we can have that home school connection that we've learned over the last 1.5 years really does make a difference, and it makes a difference in every zip code. And I can't say that enough. So that's really what the design is. And then teachers will make their instructional plans, make the references to tutoring, but we're still working through that. So we'll have teachers working this summer over that, but we'll keep you updated. Sorry, Bailey, I'm looking at your time. I took too much time.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Y'all, we're having, so let's own that like Zoom webinar, not everybody can see, the panelists can see every chat, but not all of the attendees can. So Jamila and Ryan are having a conversation about expectations in the chat that not everybody can see. But Ryan had a question that was basically like, what do we do about grown-up expectations here? We know we have this finding in the opportunity myth that there are some grown-ups who just don't believe their kids can be successful on grade level standards. What do we do about that? I think Jamila and Ryan, side note, are planning like a separate party to discuss this in more detail. But panelists, what do you say there? How do we ensure that all the educators across the system, so teachers, but also superintendents and CAOs, et cetera, have high expectations for what's possible for kids to achieve?
Look, I'll jump in first. I think, is it Barney who keeps asking about videos? You know, are there some videos where we can show this in action? I don't know the answer to that. That's a great idea. I think that is exactly the kind of thing seeing is believing, right? And I think that's important. I would just, one other point though, is we can't turn this into magical thinking either, right? I mean, people are not going to take us seriously if we say, oh, you know, you've got a kid who's 5 grade levels below and they're in 9th grade and you're going to just wave your hands and do acceleration and magically they're going to do fine. I mean, so there's got to be some credibility here too. You know, Dr. Santelises and I have had some very polite disagreements in some public op-eds and such about, you know, whether it's ever appropriate to have kids repeat a grade. You know, I would argue that it's so hard to know based on previous research on what that tells us about this year that we haven't had in 100 years. You know, that there just may be some kids who, if they've really been basically not doing school for this past year and their family feels very much like they need to kind of start fresh, that we need to listen to that. And I personally think, especially for those littlest kids, you know, because some parents, they held their kindergartners back so they didn't have to do virtual kindergarten. So now they're a year older. If there were parents who did send their kids to virtual kindergarten, but they didn't maybe get much out of it, it seems unfair to make them keep moving forward if they don't think that's what's best for them. So, I mean, I think that we just also have to be realistic here, and we can't pretend that acceleration is the answer in every case or regardless of how big those gaps are, even if it should be our sort of default go-to orientation.
I also think that's why we kind of say high quality instructional materials fuel this process, is because it often gives us a roadmap for instruction that we then have teachers try out. And really what we found is having kind of those experiences bookended by deep reflection, deep supported reflection with coaches or instructional leaders, where you talk to teachers about their mindsets going into instruction. They have the instructional experience where they're like, oh my God, my kids could do this. And we come out and we have them kind of talk through and uncover like, what were some of their areas of hesitancy kind of going in. I think the other thing is building in system time for teachers to get support in their planning and preparation with a coach who can help them think about what are the just-in-time interventions or instructional moves that you're going to make in this particular lesson within your context with your students, and not expecting teachers or educators to be able to do that kind of thinking on their own, and kind of eradicating the archetype where like a great teacher is one who can like live on an island unto themselves, doing their own thing, creating their own curriculum. This is going to really require an all hands on deck approach that we need to really be ready for.
I'm going to ask us all to close with just, we've gotten a couple of different questions, Barney's questions about video, some questions about like, what are the resources? If I'm an educator, like where can I go to learn more? I think we've shared some of them, including Fordham's CAO Central website as like great starting points. But if we can go around just like, what are everybody's favorite places to go to learn more about how to think about this?
So one of my favorite places, in addition to all the folks represented in this space, so clearly I love reading and I haven't stopped doing that. So I do appreciate the folks who have the time to do the studies. I will also say I go to the classroom teachers who have the receipts. And I got to tell you that that's why the question about the videos was such a big deal for me, because I do think in the end, it does not matter what the theoretical design is. If we cannot show it in actual classroom practice with people who are doing it, and I will give a shout out to people like Jamila Fort, who was a mathematics teacher of the year finalist this year. I will shout out Kier Butts, who is an absolutely amazing teacher of the year from Baltimore City. They do it every day. They get what it looks like. They know how to do it. And until we can show people what it looks like, we can't really fully expect folks to do it. So I still go back to classrooms, and it's probably because I miss them sitting in a soup chair.
Probably none of the rest of us can top that, but any other places you'll go?
No, I mean, I think my take is that the best instructional materials do have this mindset built into them. And so, you know, I think that's also the right place to start. And if they don't, then that's a big problem.
One other place that I think is really important to go, and I frankly wish I had more resources. Andy, you might be able to help out here, but is student voice organizations, and sometimes just individual student leaders on social media that I like to follow, because you know, we have the privilege of being able to share our platform with students from all over the country. Recently did a blog post with 3 students just talking about their individual experiences during the pandemic, which were quite different. They were in the same school system, but they just had very different experiences. And so I always learn something when I get a chance to talk directly or indirectly to students who are going through a very difficult time. But very often, they are always really sophisticated consumers of the educational experiences we provide. And very often they have incredible insights.
And y'all, we are almost at time, so I want to make sure I have a second to say thank you to the panelists. Mike, we are so grateful that Fordham decided to join us and partner with this. Dr. Santelises, cannot thank you enough for taking the time to be here when I know there are certainly other very big, important things that you could be doing. We're grateful for that. And for those of you who took time out of your day to come, thank you. We know you are exceptionally busy. We also know that this thinking about how we improve the quality of students' experiences as many of them come back in person for the first time in 21-22 is a big thing we are all facing together. And so we are grateful to those of you who took the time to be here. We will follow up with a recording and all the resources we discussed, as well as contact information. So you can reach out to a couple of us if you have other questions. So thank y'all. We appreciate it.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.